So let's begin. Okay, it's great to have you all here for the talk, design talk hosted by Arkihive. Okay, we'll have you all on mute until the session ends, and then we'll open the floor for Q&A. Where then, even through the session, you can drop your questions in the Q&A box or in the chat. Okay, we'll take your question all in the end. So few of you had already dropped your questions in the registration form. We have all of that noted as well. We'll take that up also in the end. All right. So to start with, minimalism, right? Minimalism is a style of art that emphasizes extreme simplicity. Now, how do you find beauty in simplest forms, right? So, yeah, the question is, how do you find beauty in the simplest of forms? Before we begin what minimalism is, let me take you through a few examples of how minimalism is applied and how it can be practiced in different forms. Let me bring you this news that this is the event that stayed the news like few months ago, which created a huge buzz in all social media platform and in the news, where the cargo ship got stuck or dislodged in the Suez Canal, right? It was there for like weeks. It hadn't moved. So this created an opportunity for people to create content and create a creative base. So one such content is on the poster is on the left, where a media company created a very simplest form of how the situation is there in Suez Canal. Right, the Z basically represents how the ship has been stuck in the canal. It is a very simple example of how you can communicate. And this is what we understand and try to convey, pursue purpose-driven content, right? So this is first thing to minimalistic approach. Then we have this Guggenheim Museum, and the poster here represents the swirls of the corridor. The museum, the famous museum from by Eiffel, right, was dedicated to modern art, right? And the swirls represents the circulation within the building. Again, focus on what's important, what has to be conveyed. This is a second step to minimalism. This was just to have your interest on minimalism and how it can be applied in different aspects. Now moving on to Arkihive, introducing Arkihive, what our platform is and who we are. Okay, to begin with the story of Arkihive, so we are in building discovery platform. Okay, soon to be launched mobile application for architects and other construction professionals. We are headlining series of event, one design talk every month to talk about architectural concept, style, is one like minimalism, and another series where we will bring market expert to talk about materials, where we'll be exploring building materials. Right, you can stay tuned with our social media channels to be updated about these events. Now, moving on to our speakers. So, I'm Anusha. I'll be your host and moderator for the evening. We have Shreya and Ranjani with us. And to tell a little about us, right? Okay, I'm a fan of this phrase where why waste time? Say a lot of word when few word can be said. Like if you're a fan of Office, you will understand that. But I'm not going to do that today, though. I'll be explaining what minimalism in whole. And then we have Shreya talking about Indian architecture and how it can be reflected in minimalistic concept can be reflected in Indian context. Then we have Ranjani breaking down the principles of minimalistic concept and how it can be applied in your design projects. So now here's how we'll walk you through the event. First, the story of minimalism, how and why minimalism was born. Then Shreya taking us through the Indian context and Ranjani explaining the principles of minimalism. Where and how minimalism began. We have this expressionism, right? Expressionism is an art movement that began as a style okay, let me take this example of this famous poet, the Scream, right? It was extremely famous. It basically denotes your anxiety, all your emotions, right? Everything. It conveys the art form of this period conveys emotion in extreme surrealism. So that is in the background also you will see the illusionist form and like all those strokes of it. All of it was far away from realism. So that was expressionism. That phased out to abstract art. Abstract art shows a lot of vibrant colors, smudges and lines, right? And in the picture, what you see here is, right? Let me take you. Yeah, this one, right? It's actually a picture of a factory. It neither in form or shape looks like a factory, nor with its colors, right? Factories are always represented in grays, right? This is no way like a factory, and that is abstraction. Right? From abstraction, we move to Dadaism. Again, Dadaism was more like a art movement than architectural style, but this is what led to modernist architecture, what we see and experience today. Right, and then this is my favorite timeline, the pop culture. Right, this took architecture. I mean, this is when architecture went pop. It was influenced mostly by pop culture. Pop culture, I mean, classic comic books and extreme fantasy that tried to take its place into real world. So quirky shapes, colorful buildings, extreme, extravagant, and extreme shapes and quirky artwork. Right? That was pop art. Then how did we move into minimalism, right? There was a drastic change. So this is a period when by this time people had experienced two world wars. They had gone through extreme traumatized experience, and all the art form tried move from organic, quirky shapes to very rigid, asymmetric, and geometric shape and form. So the complete vocabulary changed to a minimalistic structure. Why? Because poverty had destroyed all production. Okay, and this is when Great Depression also hit. So there were barely food; they could barely make a living. And then that is why they started focusing on essential and what is extremely indispensable. So this was the birth of minimalism. And what is minimalism? Minimalism could mean different things for different people, and it could be applied into various walk of life. So I like to ask Shreya and Ranjani, what do you think minimalism is for you?
I think for me, minimalism is not going too overboard, just to keep it simple.
The simplest forms, right? Definitely.
Yes. Yes. For me, minimalism is more of the quote, that less is more. So it's basically trying how to create, a great structure or anything that holds a lot of value using less of the things. So it's like that for me.
That's great. So less is more, that's my favorite quote too. And God is in details, right? How can we not talk about Mies van der Rohe quote when we're talking about minimalism? And everyone in the audience, you can also pen down your thought. You can write down in the chat of what you think minimalism is, or you can write it down to yourself. So by the end of the session, you realize what understanding you've gained over this period and how you can apply minimalism in your life and in your design. Okay. Now I will be taking you to talk about the elements, right? How do you break down minimalism? How do you identify minimalism in a project? So you will mostly find massing, right? You will notice a huge block of structure and negative space has been carved out of it for natural ventilation, for light, like exactly how the spaces have been carved out, right? And extremely clear and clean geometric lines perpendicular to the ground, responding to the surrounding, the nature, everything. Very clean lines. The massing of the blocks and the openings are structured very what do I say in a well thought out and programmatic way, where the lines and all the openings give way to bringing light inside the structure and for cross ventilation. That's how minimalism can be easily identified in a building structure, right? And this is one famous example by John Parsons. He's one of the prodigy in advocating minimalism after Mies van der Rohe, after Tadeusz. He's one of the prodigy. And like I said, right, minimalism is not only applied to architecture, it can be seen in various walks of life. And mostly right now, minimalism is also practiced in lifestyle, right? Minimalistic living. Big people are moving towards that because of consumerism, and that can also be advocated. So now taking you through analyzing buildings and how spatial programming and few elements of designs can be seen in famous buildings. Okay, this was one of the Pritzker Prize winners' work. Okay, Moriyama House. It's a very interesting housing dwelling. Okay, it has about 10 singular block placed in a very exquisitely small plot, like less than about 300 square foot. And they have 10 blocks. Imagine that. If you see, they're like in different heights. So in the block, I mean, and also there is no boundary wall. And if you see, it has no boundary between the public and private space. Only the trees and the plants act as a buffer. and at the early stage, even that isn't there. But you'll see more pictures of how the trees create buffer space, right? And these were the 10 blocks that I was talking about. In a very extremely small space, 10 different blocks created for six users, six tenants probably. And the user, right, the owner gets to decide which of the block that he wants to use and which of these can be rented out. So it completely, I mean, it constantly and completely changes its whole program. And the circulation, the transitional space gets easily adapted, right? It's very interesting how the spatial organization work here. And inside each dwelling also, if you notice, extremely clean walls, as in no internal walls. It's only the external walls, and it is demarcated or separated only with furniture or the staircases. Right. And if you notice the massing of the block and how they use the open space as a community living, how they use the terrace as gathering space, and how this person uses as in different area to sit and enjoy the space, how it's truly been used. It's a very interesting project. And also, if you see, they've created this floating effect to make the massing even more lesser and lighter. And if you see the opening that they've created, they have huge and large windows into the small dwelling unit. And strategically, they've created trees and open strategically they've placed the trees also to not hinder the privacy as well. So this is one great example to see how minimalism can be applied in design, planning, and spatial usage, right? And then, oh, this is one another favorite project. So this is a pavilion designed by Alvaro Sita. So it has pizza, right? Sita. He's a Spanish architect, and it evolved in different stages. This project was Lisbon's. They had celebrated their national day, and they wanted a pavilion for all the citizens to come gather and make this as a phenomenal area and create an ode to the ocean that you see on the other end, right? So this is what the brief was about. So the architect started with a gable roof structure. He wanted to create the feeling of a very huge space, give them a grandeur appearance and all of that. But that didn't solve the problem of keeping the users free from the climatic conditions, if it rains or all such sort. And then this technique was used to reduce all the internal columns. If you see, the span is so huge, it is about 70 by 50 meters in length and width. Like, it's so huge, and yet it feels so light. Okay, it's been so this is about talking about taking structural elements into consideration to create a very minimalistic structure. Right. The technique was here used is a pre-stressed, similar as how you use in suspension bridge, right? So your steels are pre-stressed, and then the concrete is poured over to keep it away, keep it less from swaying and bouncing off. So that's how the structure is extremely sleek, and this is called a parabolic curve. Okay, one great example for a structural design where you can take into consideration your wall thickness, reducing your internal wall, placing your columns. Where do you think the columns are placed here? On the extreme ends of the block, there are 9 huge columns supporting the structure, right? Taking all these into consideration to create a very minimal design. Next, we have the very infamous project Church of Light. How do we not talk about Taro Ando when we're talking about minimalism, right? So this is where light meets concrete. Like, the play of light and using raw materials is extremely well done here. So how this project came to be is very interesting. Taro Ando had the brief was because this is a renovation project and it's a communal church again. So the budget was extremely low. And how did he create this? Using the material as raw as possible, bringing natural light into the space. So strategically placing the cross at the altar end and creating light only through the space. So this is very similar to how our garbhagryahas are designed in temple architecture here. Similarly, the light is only there at the altar. So you have a sense of calm and peace even when the materials used here are raw and very drastic. So that's that one for us. And we move on to how these minimalistic concepts are used in Indian space, right? We have Shreya talking to us about Indian architecture and minimalism in Indian context.
Thank you, Anusha. So, guys, if you see in the last decade, the minimalistic movement has become stronger, and many people in a lot of number, they've opted for a debt free living. So, minimalism, if you see, it's a very subjective topic, but in this terms, what I mean is what can be clutter or, very difficult to understand for someone can be a very essential value adding thing to someone else. Okay, so here we are talking about India, and when it comes to India, minimalism is basically an anti-consumerism movement, and India is on its verge of consumerism. Okay, we are often lured by high-end labels and luxurious brands. In a way, what we are trying to do is we are running behind something which where the minimalists in the West are coming out of. So India is a country where less is always less, and even more isn't enough for them. Moving ahead, talking about the architecture of India. So basically, the architecture of India, it is rooted in its history, culture, and religions. So if you dive into the pool of Indian history, what you'll see is, let's take an example of Chettinad houses. So it was famous for it having multiple courtyards, and each courtyard was specified for its particular use. So basically, this particular, if there are like three courtyards in a house, so the first courtyard, the thing that it will serve, the other two won't serve that. They will be for the other purposes also. And it was like the very important fact of that was it was also famous for its ornamentations, and especially the carved pillars that were used in Chettinad houses. Also, the walls were decorated with stucco arts, and wall paintings made from stencils were created and used for providing rich interiors. Like, this is the particular example of Chettinad houses, but if you look at the history of Indian architecture, most of it was famous for its high end ornamentations, may it be jalis or anywhere. If any architectural monument you visit, you'll have like a lot of details in it. Okay, but India is well known for its design and its inclination for kaleidoscopic colors, like multiple colors and details. But recently, if you see, the design world has begun simultaneously, and it has cautiously dipped into the minimalistic pool. So Indian minimalism tends to indulge in more warmer and more rustic wood-like textures when it comes to minimalism these days. This return to natural materials, basically, plus the addition of stone accents, means that while the minimalistic theory is still in the place, the design takes more of a comforting, familiar aesthetic that is missing from the sleek forms elsewhere. So here, let's look at one such building from India that is a very good example of minimalism. So here we'll be talking about, if you're a fan of minimalistic houses, I think you're going to love this house. This building is the Copper House, and it was a project by Studio Mumbai, built in 2005. So it is located in a dense grove of mango trees, and it has a brook like flowing nearby this site, which often floods during the monsoons. Obviously, we all must be aware of the situation of Mumbai, how it happens, the floods and everything. So, to protect the inhabitants from the enroaching landscape, like the lot of mango trees all around, and the house is set on an artificial high ground made of dirt dug from a well from the site itself. And the open air courtyard at the center of the plan is paved in black basalt stones that also allows rainwater to drain below the house. So moving ahead, we are going to talk about the language and logic of the buildings, which is located in three primary architectural moves. We'll be talking about all the three here. Let's move ahead to the first point, which is the creation of two distinct blocks. So if this particular copper house is basically, it's a creation of two distinct blocks which vary by a distance of foot, and it is separated by a stone paved courtyard on the ground, like I said before. So there is a courtyard in between, and these two blocks lie on the opposite ends, and it is it is united by the a roof plane at the upper level. Here, if you see at the upper level, there are two spaces one singular space is of bedroom and bath, and the other has an additional study. So moving ahead to the second point. So basically, the second is the layering of light through the series of material gestures. Here, the materials play an important role. It helps the spaces in communicating well with exteriors. So use of wooden textures and those gaps in between helps. When you have nature so near, you don't really need additional ornaments. So here, the wooden textures that have been used, the doors, the windows, and the spaces between the wooden blocks, so they provide like very good lighting in the house, and that's why the house was designed according to the minimalistic like principles. If you see it was, and the use of light was a crucial feature. Talking about the last point, like the third point on which the building is actually made. So as I told earlier, there is a brook near the house that floods each year during the monsoon. So obviously the last point was to incorporate the element of water, whether in the form of the monsoon rain, which is continuous in its action on materials and mood, or in the form of the well, the stream, and the pool beyond, which is situated beyond the house. So the seasonal anxiety of the ground is addressed in the manner in which the paving is worked out within the courtyard in a continuous linear fashion and in a loose ring around the house. So, with fluctuations registering the flow of rainwater as it reaches the nearest point of exit. So here we'll also have a look on the how this particular house incorporates minimalism in its interiors also. So if you look at the first picture, what you can see is the minimalist if you see, there is a space of place of sitting. Basically, it's the place where you can sit and read. Also, if you see, there are a lot of wood, like a lot of wood that is used in this house, which makes it look warmer and familiar. As I told you while talking about the architecture of India, how it's evolving in terms of minimalism, you can see that India, in terms of minimalism, we have started using the wood, which provides a much more warmer and familiar look. And you can see that particular example right in this building itself. And if you see the dining room, there's no extra things to make it, luxurious or a high-end fashion-like brand. Like there's no use of multiple pendant lights or maybe chandeliers. Nothing is used. It's just a simple dining table and chairs there. And that provides the proper example of what minimalism is. And if you see the last picture, so in that you can see the bedroom, and there are like two windows both sides, which is lighted by the sun. Okay, and that lighting is basically all day long, which was the second feature, like I described you. So lighting plays a very important role in this entire house. It's more natural, and since we have trees all surrounding all over the site, it's a very beautiful thing. So this was all about the copper house particularly. I hope it was easier to understand how we are growing in terms of in Indian architecture, and this particular building can be used as a very great example for when it comes to Indian minimalism, since like you have seen in all the slides here. Moving ahead, I'll like to hand it over to Ranjini, where she'll be taking a dig on the minimalistic yet elegant spaces on how you can create it and the design aspects of it. Handing over to you, Ranjini.
Sorry, I was talking.
I was just going to remind you had to unmute yourself.
Okay. So thank you, Shreya. Thank you, Anusha. That was quite insightful talk so far we have. We have seen and learned how minimalism has taken place in architectural design. So don't you want to see how we can implement minimalism in our architectural design, the regular designs, what we do? So let's start with the context. So context is basically the surrounding, and it is one of the most primary variables we consider while we design. There is nothing better than taking inspiration from what is already existing and incorporating it into our design. This doesn't only merge the new to the existing, it also adds a new layer to our design. In the image, what we can see is the lush green surrounding the house not only accentuates its aesthetic appeal, Also, the green complements the stark white and warm brown, thus completing the design. While talking about context, it's a macro level. Coming down to micro, let's talk about form and the famous quote saying, form follows function. What does it exactly mean? The requirements of a structure is to project its functionality through its form. A minimalist design accommodates only beauty that serves a purpose. When talking about form, obviously, geometry goes without saying. So, what is geometry? Geometry is one of the most vital aspects of design. A simple geometry can result into many complex forms with lots of twists and turns. Since minimalism is all about stripping down to the essentials, it comes down to the basic geometry and lines in case of architecture. In the image, we can depict that it's a church just because of the presence of the cross. But the building itself, does it resemblance to the usual church, what we see or what we imagine? No, right? It's just the two rectangular box places on top of each other. Yet it serves its purpose and thus it's successful in its functionality through its basic form and geometry. So we have to try working with basic geometrical shapes. That includes square, rectangle, triangle, and circle that best describes the design. It should dictate the sense of efficiency and straightforwardness. So whatever images we have seen so far, the composition of each is very minimal, guided by clear lines and sharp edges. Also, one thing, we should notice that there is no extra addition. An extra addition, what we call ornamentation in architecture. Minimalism believes any form of decoration that does not directly contribute to the design only acts as a source of distraction and nothing else. In the image, we cannot see any ornate detailing like cladding on the walls or corbels, gables, organic form. It's only about the straight lines, flat surfaces, and raw materials that focuses solely on the architecture. Yet, it narrates the purpose of the building and holds the flow. That's how minimalism can be achieved through geometry and withdrawing ornamentation. So we have seen so far the exterior of a building, the form of it, the structure and shape. Let's take a look in the interior. Minimalism is about uncluttered open space. So the less are the internal walls, the more is the open space. But these blank spaces should not be misinterpreted as a negative space, because whenever we say negative space, that sets the temptation of filling it. And minimalism is exactly opposite to it. Blank spaces set the foundation of minimalism because it ensures simplicity, establishes the visual focus on the necessary elements, creates serene ambience, and most importantly, it gives room to breathe. The image here has a large open area with no walls in between that differentiates between spaces, yet clearly depicts the movement. Therefore, the more free space there is, the more minimalist the building will be. So the spaces in the images here are bound by rigid walls on its four sides, right? Yet they feel so free and definitely not claustrophobic. What's the reason behind it? The reason being the natural light coming in through the punctures on the wall, also the ventilation that is taking place. Because light renders a feeling of warmth and coziness to the areas and makes them appear more spacious and airy, while ventilation confirms the user's comfort. It complements the design and enhances the aesthetic, making the users comfortable. That's why it is one of the most essential elements of minimalism. Talking about internal walls, less internal walls and natural light and ventilation, we move forward to the monochromatic palette, materials, and texture. That is what mood board is. So now let's get into the details. So when talking about minimalism, the elements can be of monochromatic palettes, allowing the details stand beautifully as they are. One point we should keep in mind that clean walls are suggested while designing a minimalist space. But that does not do away with the idea of hanging some artwork on your wall. But again, you should keep in your mind that the alignment of the artworks should be in a linear arrangement. Otherwise, it will break down the sense of minimalism and it will make a chaos. Talking about the colors, we have to mention the materials and texture. So after color, materials and texture play a great role. Although minimalism goes with simplicity and bare minimum, that does not restrict one to experiment with different textures. Rather, number of textures will make the space more dynamic and vibrant. And while talking about vibrancy, plants go without saying. The hint of green can easily make a space more lively and cheerful because minimalism is not about boring interior. Besides paying attention to the neutral elements, let's shift our focus to the elements that we already have in the space. So we'll talk about proportion, scale, and shape. Minimalism and small space get along beautifully. Mixing bigger elements with the smaller ones help to achieve the most out of every usable inch because that's how it creates the balance. In the image, presence of well-defined lines and objects with sharp angles bring forth the vitality of a space, besides adding the minimalist character to the same. Now, while talking about elements, you have ample of it in your desired space. But then now the point is how to arrange them, how to orient them in a particular space to achieve the minimalism. So minimalism is a lot about decluttering and limiting to essentials only. To eliminate the accumulation of objects over the years, storage units are the solution to it. But if you're not the person who wants to keep all your things behind the closed shelf, you can have it out in the open. But then you have to keep in your mind that the things or the elements should be in order. How you can achieve that? By stacking them in a neat pile that radiates the cohesiveness of the space. Now, we have talked about the monochromatic palette, the colors of the same tone, but then hint of pop-up colors here and there does not break the minimalism essence. Rather, breaks down the monotony and narrates a language. Eventually, it enhances the spatial quality and coaxes one into the same. This is one of the fresh ways to make a space stand out, popping a bright color. Now imagine you have a bucket full of different elements for a space, and you're confused whether you should keep them all or not. So the trick is the choice of elements should be tightly knitted. Each item needs to make a strong contribution towards making the space minimalist, with their individual characteristic and together as a whole. Thereby, it demonstrates the cohesiveness and unity of a space and stands out being the minimalist. This is all we have for you, but this is not the end to it. There is a lot which you can explore on your own. And moving on to the next, we have few questions. And yes, we would like to answer now.
That was very interesting, Rajni. I'm sure they have insights on how to take minimalism into their projects. They're like vast elements that they can apply. So there were a few questions that we got while you guys had registered the forms. So we wanted to start with that. And if you have more questions, you can drop it in the Q&A and we'll open the floor for discussion.
Yes.
Yes. So to start with, yeah.
Yes.
So this is what
Anusha,
was saying.
Yeah. So Anusha, how do you convince your clients with minimalism?
So to begin with, right, mostly how clients come to you, right? They come with a budget, right? How do I mean, I want so many things, but I also want it within a budget. So you can preach minimalism to them when you can convince them that it's going to be extremely cost effective because it's devoid of ornamentation, no extravagant essence and added, devoid of all of extra things, right? There you have your first point, defending them in terms of how this is not going to raise their budget. Second, how is this going to affect them, like, in terms of efficiency, because of added natural light and cross ventilation into the surrounding? In a longer term, this is going to help them in achieving a better environmental solution, right? This also answers our second question, but yeah, this is going to help give them a better opportunity for reduced energy saving option. So these are the two major points that I feel like, will definitely convince them and how you can preach minimalism to your clients. And if you have interesting thoughts, audience, you can also add in your points here. If you would
Also,
like to.
Anusha, I came across few points like few psychologists, they say when you have a very simple place like uncluttered space and open space, it affects your cognitive load. I mean, less cognitive load. So that increases your productivity. And yes.
So you get to enjoy the space as it with less clutter. The true essence of space is enjoyed in that sense.
Exactly. Next, we have why minimalism and do we need it really? How will it impact our environment? I think Anusha has already demonstrated it, right?
We've just covered that point as well.
We could probably talk about the pros of minimalism, right? So here, I'd like to add something. So basically, minimalism is mostly about quality over quantity. Okay, rather than loading the rooms with a lot of things, minimalism in architecture, it goes hand in hand with the idea of quality things over quantity. Your space might not have many things around, but it will certainly meet your needs to preserve the elegance and aesthetics of space. Quality reduces the cost of repair for furniture or other architectural elements too, I think. Yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
And when you have less elements in your design, you're producing also less waste. So definitely it's environment friendly.
And people in the audience, you can raise your hand if you want to ask any questions. And we've also shared a link to a feedback form. It'll be great if you can answer that. I mean, it will be helpful for us to host the next event. And we'd like to know what you think about this topic and more on design talk. And moving on to, we'll take the next question. How you can approach composing sheets, right? How do you minimalistically approach? I think I have someone raising hand. So we have a question from the athlete to what Ranshi was explaining, right? We have monochromatic scheme and accent color, both are contradicting. How can you use? So I think Ranshi did make a point like how you can use the color. Do you want to rephrase what you were talking about?
Yes, sure. So you can use colors of the same tone, or you can have the contrasting colors, but then again, you should keep in mind what kind of colors are you using. So it cannot be like blue, yellow, green, red, like everything in one place. It can be contrasting, it can be two or three, but then it should complement each other. And the colors of monochromatic palette that depicts the timelessness of a design, that depicts the timelessness of minimalism as well. And it surely,
like using them in the raw state, right? For example, the copper house, it is monochromatic, but actually the upper half of the structure is made of copper copper framework, right? So copper is a very static color, right? It's very bright. I mean, it's very reflective. So the entire house is composed of like concrete and wood, and then you have a very striking color as copper. So this is how you bring color to your minimalistic living. You can also use living objects like plants, bring greenery into it. It creates a very aesthetic, boho, very chic interior. So that can also, these are the simple ways how you bring accent colors and not very complementing accent colors and not contrasting
Very
colors, where
flash.
like how you use in pop art or how you see in Baha structure or art deco, where you have flashy gold colors, right? None of these, but very monotonous color. So that's how you can bring colors to minimalistic design. Then we have how the architecture can be minimalistic yet appealing and not monotonous and flat in look. And yeah, this is something to cover in overall, right? Again, you can bring in different forms and shapes that are complementing to each other. A geometric space definitely adds and breaks the monotony. And strategically placing your openings, right, bringing in natural light into your space, or even using artificial lights to, in the night to light up your space. It's very, it breaks monotonous and it's very appealing to experience the space. So use of light, and then accent colors, like we just spoke, can be yet appealing and break the monotonous. And the next question we have: does minimalism affect the overall dimension of the layout? So,
Yeah,
no,
I think
I
it
think yes,
does.
it does. Like if you see, it's a very famous thing that white and light colors make your rooms look larger, and taking the quote in consideration that less is more. So basically, it also signifies that the less things you use, the more, and your space will look much more larger than it is. Okay, if you just taking an example of a vernacular building and a minimalistic building. Okay, so if you consider, the size of the building will be the same, but when you see, there are a lot of features that are used in a vernacular building. Okay, and there are the least and bare minimum things used in minimalism, and if you compare them, so I think it'll make a difference, because light plays an important role, and the less things, it'll make your room look more larger, I think. Ranjini, you can add your points if you want.
Okay. No, that's the thing. Like when you have light colors and you let the natural light come in your design, that's when our space look more spacious and airy. How we have mentioned, right?
Yeah, definitely.
then we have another question: how can be minimalistic architecture be sustainable or green? Like if we go for green wall or green roof, it is expensive. So it can be minimalistic in terms of money. So that architecture just has to be minimalistic or sustainable, either of the both.
Okay.
Malika, would you like to talk to us and explain how, like, your question a bit more in detail so we could have a discussion? Would you be interested? If you can drop in the chat, I will unmute. I'm trying to. Yeah. Malika, if you're interested, you can talk now. Like, we'd like to understand more before we can answer the question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello.
Yeah, hi. Actually, yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, these days, like, I have been aiming to design like sustainable more. And from the webinar, I just learned about minimalism. So, how can the architecture be both like sustainable as well as minimalistic? Like, minimalistic obviously means using less money or budget, like one of you guys talked about budget also. So, if we go for sustainable design, it comes with vertical gardens, like green roofs and stuff. So those are obviously not cheap, like those are really expensive. So how can the sustainable design be minimalistic? So is it like we are obliged to choose either of them?
Not necessarily, right? So it is very contextual, all right? To give in a broader sense of idea, use of raw materials could use the material as it is in its raw form, right? You reduce a lot of cost there. And choosing your material specific to the local surrounding, that becomes a very sustainable point. Okay, so that way it becomes, there you answer one of those things. all right, in choice of your material. And you don't have to always necessarily go for green roof and vertical garden, all of that. But even when you do, and even when you think the cost of installation, all of that is high, but if you see the returns that you get, right, because of the energy efficiency and the longer run, it basically creates a net carbon zero building, right? That's how you attain sustainability.
Yeah.
So that's something that these are some of the points how you can achieve both. But we would, I think we would come back with more realistic ways on how you can achieve both. Probably if you can stay tuned to our social media channel, we will come back with more realistic application on how you can do both realistic and sustainable projects.
Yes, thank you.
This is a very interesting question, and if anyone has more to add, can definitely add to this.
Yeah, I think I like to add that it's a thing that she said that minimalistic architecture is usually it's not it's less expensive, but I think that's a very subjective thing, that it's less expensive in terms of when it comes to the interiors and furnitures and stuff. But if you see according to the client's requirements and stuff, right, even minimalistic buildings can be to reduce the chaos in the space while fulfilling the client requirements, right? Many of the times it can be expensive. So, and also the building we were talking about, the copper house, it is made by a very famous architect, Bijoy Jain, who's a very famous Indian green architect. So I think that adds value to your question, I think, because it is it is a very famous project, and I think it can be a green building.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Malika. And we have another question very similar to that: how minimalism and biophilic design can, work well together. I think when she was mentioning green roof and this thing, all of that, and biophilic is completely a different aspect as well, right? Like how very specific to natural and nature responding structure. I think we would want the audience to throw some light on this as well. If you have some points, we'd like to hear from you too. Like the ant hill, like the ant house, all of this is a biophilic design. They're also minimalistic in nature by itself. But how do you blend in and create an architectural style and interior space? Is what you want to know. Is that the question? I mean, let me unmute you. Yeah, I have. So if you want to add to your question on how biophilic designs can be minimalistic,
hello?
Hello? Yes. Hi. Hello.
Hi. Firstly, I enjoyed the webinar very much. It was really informative. Thank you for this. And coming back to the question, I was just trying to ask, how does a combination of both minimalistic and biophilic design work? Not necessarily biomimicry, but adding elements of nature within the indoors or in the exterior as a part of the facade.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think we can, is it possible to maintain a balance between biophilic and minimalist design? Is there any approach to it, a particular approach to it?
Okay, that's a very interesting question, and I do not have an example of building one such application has already been experienced. So yeah, I think we'd come back to you on this as well. If you watch us on the social media, I think we'll definitely have some interesting answers on how biophilic design can be adapted to minimalism as well. Right? It's very interesting, Shikha.
Thank you.
Then we have another question. How can we keep the furniture in our room minimalistic and still have good amount of storage space? I think Ranjini was just talking about how you can stack things together. Ranjini, you want to explain a little more on this?
Okay, so if you have a lot of elements in your space, so they say like storage unit would be the solution. Storage unit would be the answer to it. You can just take the elements and keep it in the shelf. Or if you're not that kind of a person, if you want to show your elements to the visitors, you can have it in the open. But then you want to, like, you have to stack it in an ordered manner so that it emits the sense of cohesiveness, it emits the sense of unity in a space. And that's how you bring the minimalism in your space. So it's definitely the arrangement of elements and the orientation of your elements. Yes.
I think that answers the question. We'll take the next one. Next one is, being a minimalist or a minimal design should not be always flat roof and blank walls, right?
Yes, definitely not. Like we have mentioned in one of our slides, like minimalism suggests to have a blank wall, but then you can surely have art pieces or any kind of, decorations on your wall. Then you need to keep in your mind that the alignment of the, pieces or the arts should be in a linear arrangement, not in a haphazard way. Otherwise, it will break the essence of minimalism. It will create a chaos. So it will lose the charm of minimalism. So the arrangement is very necessary. I mean, that's the key word here, the arrangement and orientation of elements. You can have a lot, but then you should know how to place them. Like with each other.
Down to necessary elements, right? Exactly.
Yes.
And
yes.
Flat roof, to that point, I would like to add the example by Alvaro Siza, right? The Portugal pavilion. That's not a flat roof design, right? That's a parabolic concrete structure. So you can definitely create minimalistic structure that are not flat roof and that are not just blank walls. You can, it can be very artistically placed. The whole structure and the form can be artistically made and still be minimalistic. And you have another question on, why can't we find minimalism in traditional buildings and sloping roofs? Because I think traditional, when you saw the timeline, right, until we were hit with World War and until we were traumatized, all of them were extremely expressionist architects and designers, but they want to show a lot of emotion in their structure and artwork. So that's why there is no traditional buildings where you can find minimalism used. But also, use of raw materials will definitely be there. That tends to give you a very timeless, structure and timeless design. So this is how you can find minimalism in traditional building. And yeah, I think Shreya wants to add some more on this point.
Yeah, I actually wanted to add that. So for this question, you must have seen the Sabarmati Ashram by Charles Correa, right? So I think it's a traditional building, historic building, but with sloping tiled roofs. But the thing is that it is minimalistic in terms of the the living of Mahatma Gandhi, but not in terms of the building itself. So that's how it can be. You can see minimalism in terms of people's living and their the furnitures and all those stuff. But I think when it comes to particularly sloped roof, like tiled roofs, I think it's difficult to find buildings that are minimalistic, since it's a Japanese concept and it has just recently begun. So that is the thing.
And if did we answer that, Saif Musa, I have actually unmuted you. If you want to add more to that, you can. Otherwise, we'll move on to the next question. You can definitely raise your hand and add more to that. I'll be taking the next question. Will it be precautionary using minimalism like in a bedroom that we saw in previous slides? There were 2 lamps in the bed, but the wardrobes were not seen. In the copper house bedroom, right? Yeah. Shreyansha wants to know where the storage units were there in the copper house.
Yeah.
It was a very minimalistic design. Yeah.
So basically, in the copper house, how it is that the view that you must have seen was of the bed with two windows on both the sides, but there was space, on the back side, where you could add the wardrobe, like the wall wardrobes which are available. Or since it was a very big house, like you had separate rooms also. But in terms of bedroom, if you see, if your concept is that like there is a bedroom and there are just lamps and windows, so I think the wardrobe can be installed on the back side or like in the front of the bedroom or something like that. Okay. So I think that was the concept basically of the copper house, but you could use the same thing or improvise on the design aspect of it.
Sri Pratapan had an additional point to that. So I've given you access. I mean, I've unmuted you, so you can also add to the point.
Okay. So we're talking about the bedroom, right? So why don't we see wardrobes, or how do we manage the minimalism, right? Having such in like Indian context, when we have like so much of storage requirements in clients, what you can do is so basically you don't have to have a lot of patterns on your wardrobes, right? Choose a complementary color, right? If you have a beige tone, right, your accent wall is behind your bed, right? So you can choose your finish of your wardrobes, which can be in line to your walls, right? And these wardrobes could be sliding, or you have the foldable the normal doors, right? But try to have minimal handle designs, right? Very sleek ones. Don't bring in any patterns to it. Keep the color in pattern to your walls, right? So this breaks the bulkiness of the wardrobe in bedrooms. So how do you break down such big units in the room into a minimalistic design is doing this. That's kind of how I follow in my practice, right? So whenever we find that wardrobes are really big in a room, we try to implement this kind of a design strategy so that it reduces the effect of bulkiness in a room. Did I answer? I think two of them had asked that same question.
Yes, Shri, I think that gives us the answer. Yeah, okay, let me unmute. If they have more questions, you can drop more questions and let us know. I've also unmuted Suryansha. Okay, and then we also have how to use minimalism in exterior buildings, right? As a facade treatment. Or I want to understand more on your question. I'm giving you access to talk. So, Tasneem, if you can explain the question, it will be.
I asked how to like
Hi,
use this in the hi. I'm asking how to use it in the like big building,
outside,
like a museum or in the facade.
In the facade, right? All right.
Yeah.
So all minimalistic building are extremely clean. How you can bring in work on the forms, like give openings. So I think one of the example that the greatest example that we saw was John Paul's example, the house, the Spain house, right, where there's a long water body in front of the house. It's a very minimalistic rectangular block, but they had a huge puncher in the wall to access, right? That creates a difference in the. That was one example, like how you can create difference in the exterior of the building, create the openings that you can use, strategically place the openings.
Also, I think, Anusha, now the cladding, like aluminium cladding or different kind of claddings, are in culture, like we use it for fancy exterior walls. But if we do away with that and we just keep the raw material there, say concrete, I think that would also add as a minimalism aspect to the exterior of a building.
Yes. Use in its raw form, like the Church of Light, right? You must see the lines and the lines on the concrete and the punctures, right? Those are mostly because of the form work, the steel barricades that were used to make use while the concrete was poured. Right now, you can create those form work even artistically, but when you start using the materials in the exterior and leave them as raw as possible, that creates a very creates a interesting vocabulary that you can do.
Okay, thank you. That was very, very good. Thanks.
Could you suggest some documentaries of existing projects to visually understand the content itself? I'm not sure about documentaries. Minimalistic
Actually,
lifestyle has.
there's a
Yes.
movie on Netflix, The Minimalist, The Less Is Now. It's available on Netflix, which you can watch, and there are a lot more. If you see, like you might get into suggestions also. But I think this movie is more about how you can you can create your lifestyle more using less of things, and it's not just subjective to your particular lifestyle, but also in terms of architecture. So if you watch it with a little details in it, giving you giving a lot more information on the details, I think you this movie might help you.
This minimalist, it talks more about minimalistic lifestyle there, but there are a couple of other architects. Example, the Moriyama house that I had explained earlier, where it had a housing dwelling, that has a small, not a documentary, but a small video of how the space has been used. So we will probably share the links to these videos in the mailer, and along with the deck, if you guys are interested. We'll definitely be more than happy to do that.
I think you can also keep a look on our Instagram channel. We might bring you a carousel on it, suggesting movies or documentaries on it. You can keep a count on it.
Pooja, the movie name on Netflix is Minimalist. You can look for it. I think there are 2 documentaries on Netflix on minimalism. And we'll definitely share a link to it, the name of it in the mail for you guys. And we can find minimalism in Jeffrey Bauer's building, which are having sloping roofs. Yes, very true. Jeffrey Bauer building, again, they're more vernacular and sustainable more than towards minimalism. But truly, yes, his style of architecture and using of space and everything depicts minimalism. Very true. And how to use, I think we've answered most of the questions. Do we have any more questions? If you can raise your hands, we can open up the panel for discussion. Suryansha, I've actually given you access. You can talk. I can see you've raised your hand.
Yeah, ma'am, I want to ask the third question, like how minimalism can be approached in composing sheets, like composing, designing of sheets, or
Designing of sheets. Okay, we could take it all day to explain that to you, but to give you a short or brief answer, always use the golden ratio rule, right? You have on when you start composing, superimpose the golden ratio palette or the template onto your sheet and start placing your elements. That will definitely help you composing in a better way and help you achieve minimalism. Avoid colors. Use multiple sheets to put down all your thoughts, like use one for your concept and one sheet to explain your plan, elevation and section. But when you start composing it, use golden ratio as a thumb rule. That'll definitely help you. And stick to a color palette before you start with your sheet, right? Stick to a color palette and use colors only from that. So again, you can streamline how it has to be composed. This is like a quick tip how you can use to compose your sheet.
yeah, I got it. But what if we have a limited number of sheets and we have to add so many of things, like we can choose dead, like we can choose dead drawings, like which explains more, I think.
Correct,
So
exactly. You can see. So now all of these building examples that we've tried to explain with you, right? We explain everything with one single image, most of it at least, right? You can definitely use one single angle of for your from your design to explain all of the concept, your ideologies. You can definitely do that. You can definitely bring in minimalism in with the way you explain concept as well.
Also, I think avoiding a lot of colors would also help in composing a minimalistic sheet. Basically, yeah, the lighter the sheet is, the more it looks minimalistic, I think.
yeah, right.
Avoiding the kaleidoscopic colors.
And then we have. Can you shed some light on critical regionalism and its impact on the practice of minimalism in India?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to answer that. I think I tried my best to make you understand how India is on the verge of consumerism, and minimalism is basically an anti-consumerism thing. So, the first impression of a country's culture and traditions is created from its people and architecture. India is a country which has a vast history and resulting in great diversity and popularity in its culture and traditions, and also in terms of its architecture. And usually, if you see, people of India are like really influenced with the Western culture and stuff, and we try to add that in our lives, not just in our lifestyle but also in terms of architecture. And here what I'd like to say is, I know it takes time, but if you consider the people in the West also, like I mentioned before, they are opting for minimalism. It's basically how you're trying to you're trying to live a very debt free life. So here I think that is a very important factor here. And in India, basically, like you see, in anything, it takes time to be adapted in a country, and minimalism is a very fresh concept, and slowly in smaller parts of India, we are trying to adapt with it. And I think eventually it'll help it. Okay, so basically we'll try to move out of the proper regionalism, and try to adapt the minimalism concept in India also.
And I would like to add also to this, whatever Shreya has said. So the example what we had in the slide, the Moriyama house, right? So that is one example, I could say, regionalism and minimalism together, because the house, if you see, and the place where it is situated, it's definitely the house is being very honest to its context, because the surrounding houses also, so it matches with the scale, the proportion, and everything. Get it somehow cancels the minimalism in it. So you have to study the context, the community, what you could adapt in that particular place, and also maybe a bit of vernacular architecture, what has been going on so far, and then you can add minimalism to it. You can achieve it.
Well said, Rashi. I was just going to add how vernacular architecture is a regional minimalistic design approach in India. It's very true. Right. You can read, I mean, we could definitely talk a lot about vernacular architecture, but if you read more on it, you will see how it is very similar to minimalistic characteristics that we're talking about. I hope that answers your question. If not, you can still, add more to the chat and we'll be open to take it. It's a very interesting question. And we have next question from Yash. How do we make public or commercial building minimalistic and still catch one's attention, since majority of such structure around us have a lot of ornamentation? Public building, one such example was that pavilion again. So that was, I've given you this thing to talk. So given you rights to talk, so if you want to add more to it, you can. But one such example is that pavilion building. Then we have a lot of building in Chandigarh, right? Very modernistic approach of how Le Corbusier had designed. You have a lot of examples of public buildings there where you can still strip down all its ornamentation and give its vast structure and still give it its authority and the attention it needs to be a very interesting and public building, a governmental administrative building to be precise.
Not only that, Anusha, what you have explained, like the Church of Light by Tadawando and Church on the Water.
Yes,
that is one. Yeah, few of the public buildings. But then, yes, it catches our attention till date. Like whenever we see that, we are in awe.
Yeah. It's all devoid. I was giving more regional examples. So,
and this is a question kind of related to the previous one. Probably this question is more of this shows the regionalism concept. Okay, so we see things that are highly ornamented in India because that is a key feature of India, right? A high ornamentation and stuff. But if you see, there are other examples, probably not too much in India, but in other countries where you can see, minimalistic buildings in commercial building itself. I think that is one thing.
Yeah. If you have more to add to the question, you can. Otherwise, we will move on to the next. We have, is minimalism only restricted to small scale projects? Definitely not. We were just talking about public buildings and administrative buildings or social gatherings. So definitely not. Minimalism can be advocated across all typology of projects. Can minimalism adapt with cost-effective materials like the way Laurie Baker has done? Shreya, do you want to take this? I know Laurie Baker is your favorite architect.
Yeah. I think
he's asking, can minimalism adapt with cost-effective materials and like the way Laurie Baker has done, right?
Yeah, I think it's more of a, how you can add traditional buildings, like we talked earlier, right? How traditional buildings can be adapted as minimalistic buildings. I think one of the key features of Laurie Baker was cost-effective things and how you used all the regional stuff that he got.
Local materials, which is available on site and on site, definitely.
So I think, it can.
Not only that, the way
I think yes, Anusha, you go ahead.
You go on. Yeah.
No, I think like when you're talking about minimalism, when we are talking about like styling our spaces, it's not necessary that we have to buy fresh elements to do a minimalist space. It's to do with something what is already existing, what we already have. So definitely it cuts down the cost and it's cost effective.
Yeah, definitely. I hope that answers the question. Yeah. I have a very interesting question that's talking about when minimalism is boring. Is minimalism boring?
I think no. It's very like I said, right? For few people, one thing that is very attractive, for others it might not be. So basically, for many people, the neutral color palette and empty spaces comes up as boring, and boring spaces are boring, minimalistic, and such stuff. But if you just look at the psychological thing, right? Attractive, the pleasant fabrics and the light, it plays an important role, I think. And if used properly, it can help us escape this misconception. It's not boring, it's very subjective and very it depends basically on the choices of people.
True, very subjective. And I don't think any of us here feel it's boring. But if you want to add to that and what perspective, then we'll definitely be happy to hear your perspective on that. Because we've answered your questions. So we've answered all the questions. Any more questions? I would like to launch a poll. So for people who are here, I have a bunch of topics that you might be interested in. I would like to know what we could do for the next topic. So it will appear on screen and you can select what are the topics that interest you. So we could come up with the next design talk for you. So take your 2 minutes and answer the poll. We'll be happy to see you in the next event soon. And you can choose more than one, definitely. So minimalism adapted in Jewish Museum and Berlin Wall, all of that, yes. There are also representation of modernist architecture and brutalism, right? That is also part of those design, especially the Berlin Wall Jewish Museum. That is also a brutalist style. I have an interesting thought from Arya. Is minimalism a subset of modern architecture introduced by Le Corbusier and predefined by upcoming generation architects? It's a very interesting thought. And who want to add more to it? I think it definitely is. Modern architecture developed even before minimalism did when I was talking about Dadaism, right? So that's when people start that was when World War One started. And a lot of revolution happened back then. The art movement and all of it had a lot of significance, and it affected to what we practice right now. And Le Corbusier design definitely did have a part to play in that. Well, thanks for being such a sport and taking the poll. It will be very helpful for us to make decision next time. Thanks, Arya. Any more questions? Any more thoughts, views? Very interesting. All of your thoughts, perspective was very interesting. I think it's time for us to conclude then. It was great having you all here. So you can follow us in all social media platforms. We are there everywhere. We're a pretty social and active bunch. So you can follow us there. We keep updating about the next events. We'll bring new insights on materials. We always keep talking about architecture and its application. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well. So stay tuned and thanks for being here tonight. It's so great to have you all here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.